Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
The council showed mercy. The council showed mercy.
I don't even remember what part that is.
It's in the movie. I'm not making it up.
All right.
Now you've got me doubting myself. No. It's the council was merciful. The council was merciful. See, I was kind of full of shit.
There it is. All right. Well, we're starting our episode out with a random wrong quote from the movie Watership Down from 1978, an animated classic, a notorious classic for its violence and, as you said in the last episode, traumatizing an entire generation.
Traumatizing an entire generation. And then those kids grew up and showed it to their kids. So it's just like all trauma, it just flows, it just rolls downhill.
Nice.
One of the many demons we need to purge. Anyways.
Well, this isn't a demon. I would say that this is actually a very good story inside of a very okay movie.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, and so this is also, to get some housekeeping out of the way, this is our deep dive episode where we talk spoiler-full discussion of Watership Down. If you haven't seen this movie before, highly recommend going back to the primer episode where we do a spoiler-free discussion of it, talk who this movie is for, whether or not your 5-year-old children should watch it. Probably not. Spoilers.
Probably not.
Despite what you might see about this being a G-rated film. Maybe not quite that.
I really would have loved to have been there in like the early days when like this movie didn't quite have the same notoriety that it does now. Like, I can only imagine British parents taking their kids to seeing it and then being shocked and appalled by what was going on.
It would be really funny to hear a story about 1978. I was 5 years old and went to see Watership Down, and everybody screamed in the theater every 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, something like that, right? The good old days.
Yeah. Anyway, let's talk in front of the camera and work our way back. So the starting setup of this film, we get the opening mythology of the rabbits. It's kind of got this like almost indigenous roots to it.
Yeah, kind of.
I really, really liked it. Like, as an opener, it's really solid. Like, it instantly gets us into this world, into the mythology of these creatures that we're about to inhabit their world for the next little while. And like you said, you did a really good job of explaining in the primer episode that it kind of puts you immediately into the perspective of these rabbits and, you know, how they would justify to themselves why they've been dealt such a difficult hand in life.
Such a bad hand. Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of honestly like the opening mythological part of this film is the highlight of the art style of the film for me. Like, it's significantly more dynamic than the rest of the film. That's something that actually is probably my biggest critique of this movie, honestly, is I found the art style to be pretty drab, honestly. I think is probably the right word.
There's definitely some, it feels very limited at parts in terms of like character animation and movement. Can I actually just jump into like my biggest problem with the movie? Can we just throw my cards on the table?
Sure.
Okay, my biggest problem with the movie is that like I had a hard time telling the rabbits apart.
Yes, there's definitely, especially in the first 20 to 30 minutes of this movie, I didn't have a good grasp of who the main characters were.
Yeah, and that's not to say I don't know who the characters are or what their deal is. I mean, when they're on screen, I have a hard time telling who's who, right? Like this movie opts for a very naturalistic animation style where like the rabbits look like rabbits. They don't stand upright. They don't have like Mickey Mouse white gloves. They look like rabbits, right? Which is good, I think, for the story they're telling, but like it's really funny. Like, some of the rabbits have very distinguishing characteristics. Like, Bigwig has a little tuft of, like, a little crown of fur on the top of his head. So I'd be like, okay, that's Bigwig. And, like, General Woundwort's rabbits all have, like, creepy blue eyes. So I'm like, okay, those are the bad rabbits. General Woundwort himself looks like, you know, like the
Like a
scariest.
crazed army general.
Yeah, like the scariest rabbit ever conceived by man. But like most of the other rabbits, I'm just like,
Even Fiverr at times, because Fiverr is the runt of the group. There were times where I was like, wait, was that Fiverr who just said that or not?
yeah, it's actually really funny. There's a scene where Hazel and two other rabbits try to infiltrate this farm to steal all these does. More on that later. And as they're running away, Hazel gets shot. And at first I
Right.
was like, oh no, one of them didn't make it. And then in the next scene, someone's like, Hazel got shot. And I'm like, wait, that was Hazel? Oh, shit.
No, I know exactly what you mean. It honestly, there were times, and I actually had the exact same thought as you. Like, and it takes some of the punch away from some of the plot points, right? Is if when you're not realizing that it's literally the main characters who are in danger.
Yeah, right? Like, if it weren't for, like, John Hurt's very iconic voice, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's Hazel, right? So I also just felt, and maybe this was more so early on, but like I felt like the mouth animation wasn't always on point either, you know? Like sometimes there'd be shots where multiple rabbits were on screen and someone would say something and I'd be like, which one of you fuckers said that? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. Like, and that's definitely one of the things that I was going to bring up. The other big problem that I have in this point too, is that I thought some of the voice acting could be a little shoddy at times. Like, in the sense that it didn't always feel like all of the rabbits were in the same room recording together. Like, it felt like some of their tones were slightly off at some points.
I noticed there were a couple odd line reads, you know, like I talked last week about the cringiness that you have to get over early on in this movie. And in the first scene with Hazel and Fiverr, there's a moment where two of the Oswald guards take their food. Hazel says, I don't remember Hazel's exact quote, but it's something like it's always the same with those two. Then like less than a second later, he's like, well, anyways, let's move on. And I was just like, whoa, okay. Like, we're not even going to linger on that emotion, are we? We're just going to keep going. So, like, you know, stuff like that, right? I think maybe
Right.
that's why the Bird character works so well is because, like, he is such a chaotic, dramatic, mood swingy character that, like,
And he's distinct in his accent
yeah,
and
and he's
everything
always
else.
and it feels like he's shouting all his lines in all caps. So like he almost kind of works for this kind of animation style where you're just like, oh, okay, sure, right? By the way, there
Yeah,
is a
yeah, yeah.
moment that actually drew like a very genuine laugh out of me where the bird is returning to the warren to meet with the rabbits and he just face plants into the ground, then gets up and he's like, perfect landing. Like, that was pretty. I was like, all right.
I laughed at least 3 times because of the bird, and that was
Oh
certainly
yeah,
one of them.
that was pretty funny. Also, my favorite line in the whole movie is, "You dumb bunnies, you got no mates." If I was still single, I would make that my ringtone.
Yeah, I wrote down one with him where it was something like, he was like, "It's a boat, man-made. Them float on water."
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of David Lynch's character in Twin Peaks. I forget his name, but like David Lynch plays like a mostly deaf character. So like he's always just shouting at whoever he's in the scene with, like, you know. Like
It's great.
he's
It
my
works.
he's my mom's sister's girl. Like, that's the same energy. Same
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, he's just the best part of the movie. Like, and he brings kind of a little bit of levity because honestly, up until his appearance, this is a very dark movie.
Oh yeah.
There's very few moments of triumph or genuine lightheartedness that happens up until his appearance, and he doesn't even appear until what, like halfway through the movie.
Maybe even a little bit after that. I don't really remember.
Yeah.
No, even like there's not a lot of humor or wit in the movie either. I mean, there's a little, but like there's not a lot of scenes of the characters just joking around or having a good time.
Right. And honestly, like that to me actually works. Like I like the idea of having something dark and not needing the constant like one-liners and quips and stuff like that. It's refreshing almost in a sense in 2024.
Yeah, especially if we're in like the post, like we're in the like late stage Marvelisms where it's like they had to bookend everything, every emotional moment with a quip. Like, yeah, it's like, and even when the rabbits do have their little moments of triumph, it's not really a triumph. It's more just like, oh, we survived. Like, good, we escaped.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I do want to quickly mention before I get back into the plot, like I do want to finish my thought process on the art style of this. I kind of want to explain like why I feel like it's doesn't work for me. Like it's so dated in 2024. Like the paint style is like very washed out in the background.
Yeah.
It's something that before digital animation, like this would have all been hand drawn, I imagine. And that's
Yeah,
where you
I would
get like
imagine
the
so.
characters are really the only part of the scene that generally is in motion. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that because I grew up on all of the Disney classics, the non-Pixar films from the period prior to that, and all of the Bugs Bunny, Looney Tunes stuff. Like, so it's not like I've never grown up with that type of art style and art direction, but in this sense, like it feels so bland in this film that I was genuinely like, who made this decision to have such a washed out style? Because it's just a very brown film. Like the green hues of the grass and like the trees don't ever really pop for me, and I just genuinely was kind of like surprised at how they decided to take the direction of this.
I think it's just very reflective of the times. Like, I get the sense that this movie never really had the highest budget.
Right.
So it almost kind of reminds me of did you ever watch Berserk, like the 1997 anime?
No.
No, I think it was your wife that had, because I remember talking to her about it. By the way, I stopped myself from saying girlfriend. It's been 8 months, and I'm finally accepting the fact that you have been married, which is good because I was there. Anyways, that's another. That's kind of an iconic, classic anime, whatever. And that's another thing where it looks very hand drawn and it's very limited animation and limited movement. Like, there's some big fight scenes where they pretty much just show like paintings on screen and then have sound effects. But like,
Right.
it works. Somehow it just works. Just one, because it's a very compelling story and they're very compelling characters and the voice acting is really good. I think, and again, I don't really know, so I'm kind of talking out my butt, but like, I feel like, with a budget like that and a story like this, it comes down to like directing more than anything. Like, if you have that
Right.
small of a budget, then like you really need to make sure everything's popping. And it just didn't always feel like things were popping. And there are some like good dynamic movements, like when they're in that like, the one Warren, I think it's called like the Warren of like the Shining Snare, and like
Right.
they're eating all the food that's been laid out for them.
Yes,
And
and
you see
it
the
pans
camera.
across, and we see like
Yeah.
the background, all of these rabbits like eerily
Just
watching them.
them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like stuff like that, I'm like, okay, good. I'm
Yeah, there
creeped
there are
out.
some genuinely like memorable moments like that in this film, and like that's probably one of my favorite parts of the whole movie because it manages like when they're in that warren of, I think his name is Cowslip.
Cowslip. Yeah.
I was genuinely on edge the entire time we're in that warren and that 10-minute span of the film. They were able to capture like this feeling of just overall wrongness and general wrongness that I think that the first 30 minutes of this film wasn't able to ever quite achieve, or like, it wasn't, like I said, I really genuinely enjoy the story and plot of this
Yeah.
film, but up until this point it just doesn't like, it doesn't really capture any sort of deeper feeling within me.
Yeah, and like I actually, in terms of like character animation, I really liked what they did with Cowslip. Like, he's kind of like hunched over in a weird way, and like he
Right.
almost like he kind of like moves his paw in like a very kind of grand theatrical
Yes.
way, and like there's something just kind of rumpled and weird looking about him, and that coupled with the voice, I was kind of just like, ugh. Like, all right.
Yeah.
It's funny, the prologue is really strong, but then the next 20 minutes are a little, it's not, it's almost like this movie needed to like it's almost like these animators got better as they further along in the production, maybe. Like,
Right.
I know there's that scene where Hazel and Fiverr go to talk to the chief of the Sandalford Warren, and it's just this big gray lump that keeps moving back and forth, and that was one of the moments where I was like, what is this? What am I watching? Like, so yeah. All this to say, like, this is but I mean, the fact that we both still enjoyed this movie despite these big technical limitations is really saying something.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it is just that the fact that this movie just goes for it, right? Like it doesn't shy away from the dark realities of life. And even, some of the imagery is just, it feels again really fresh even in a film from 1978. Like the field of blood vision is so incredibly dark in the beginning, and it's just like it's unsettling. And there's that kind of almost menacing tone of the score at that point in time that like heightens things. And then in that first part as well, there's some situations that they're fleeing from in the opening 30 minutes, like when they lose the only female rabbit who came with them, who's taken by a hawk. Like that's a really muting moment. Like you just kind of sit back and you're like, oh, like this movie isn't gonna pull punches.
Yeah, people are gonna die.
Yeah, it really like, and there's consequences. Like this isn't some movie where the characters go off on this adventure and everybody just has plot armor and we don't really have to worry about anyone. Anything could happen.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I did, as much as I wish maybe we could have gotten to know that rabbit a little better so her death would have meant more.
Right.
It was a very necessary moment to just be like, oh yeah, they're rabbits and everything wants them dead.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I would actually say at this point as well, is that I actually thought that this, and this is probably again a limitation of the budget and what they were able to do with what the budget that they had, but I kind of wanted more. Like I think that there's more to the story. Like I think that there's a lot more in this novel, and that's why I'm so intrigued to go and read this, is because, I think that a lot of this probably does get fleshed out in the novel, and like I genuinely like the story enough that I'm kind of craving more of it.
If I remember, the novel in particular has a lot. Like if you enjoyed that creation myth and the stories of, I don't know I forget how you pronounce it, like El Ashira, like the trickster hero of rabbit mythology.
Yeah, El oh god, I tried to figure it out beforehand and I forgot.
Let's just say like the trickster rabbit hero or whatever. Like there are a lot of moments in the book where the rabbits are just kind of sitting around, and I think it's Dandelion. Hazel will just go, Dandelion, tell us a story. And Dandelion is like the bard of the group. He'll just spin stories about like the rabbit hero. So like
Right.
if you like that stuff, then yeah, definitely check out the book. I was actually thinking like I would really like this to be turned into like a mini series, or because I feel like the plot structure itself is kind of episodic, especially at the beginning, or at least
Right.
for the first 2/3 of the movie. So like I would have definitely liked, yeah, I agree. I would have liked more. I would have also liked more time with these rabbits, so like,
Yeah.
I could tell them apart a little bit.
Right.
And then yeah, there was a 3-season, I think, adaptation in 1999.
Yes, that I think BBC and like YTV in Canada jointly did together. I actually watched the first episode of it to have that as a discussion point for today. So
Oh, well, how is it? I'm curious.
it was actually kind of interesting. The very first episode starts us off actually partway through the flight of the rabbits. Like they've already left the warren. They're actually getting relatively close to finding Watership Down.
Okay.
And it basically, the first episode starts them on the point where the dog shows up and they
Right.
have to escape across the river, is really where the first episode kind of takes us. And then it's actually in the latter half of the episode, like you actually said, and this is kind of why I'm bringing this up now, is when Dandelion has his moment of explaining the lore of the rabbits. That's actually something that happens at the end of the episode.
Okay, that's interesting that they went like in medias res with it, which is also another big convention of like epic poetry. So they were leaning into it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the art style is a little bit more dynamic in there. Like it definitely feels like a late 90s YTV, BBC type of art style. Like it's it's not like anything to write home about, but it does a
I think I
serviceable
did.
job.
I saw some images from it today, and like it's a little bit cutesier looking,
Yes,
which
that's
is
exactly what it
interesting.
is. And I
Yeah,
think that it's quite a bit more toned down than this film is in terms of some of the violence and probably some of the deaths and stuff like that. I think that, there's some give and take with this, right? Like, this one is certainly a more mature take on this, but the production values aren't necessarily there always. Whereas the miniseries is going to have a more fleshed out story, but it's going to have a more watered down and safe take on this story.
well, it's funny because this seems to be a recurring problem with these adaptations. Because I know that in 2018, Netflix did an adaptation with James Marsden and no James McAvoy and
Yeah.
Ben Kingsley, and I didn't really look into it too closely, but I seem to hear that like again, it toned down the violence and gore a lot, and also the animation was kind of janky.
Oh, I didn't watch any of that, but I saw the animation style of it, and it's like very very digital in like a computer kind of way, from like
Like
it almost looks like
CG,
a
yeah.
yeah, like a CG like 2005 kind of art style, and it looks awful. It really does look
Yeah,
bad.
again, I haven't looked too much into it, but I heard that fans were mad that the art style, like it was janky movements and shit, which,
Yeah.
by the way, guy, it's Netflix. It's 2018. How did you guys screw this up? So
Yeah.
I guess somewhere out there, someone has a vision for the perfect adaptation of this novel. We just haven't gotten it yet.
Well, honestly, like, and that was something that while I was watching this, I was honestly thinking about, like, how would I take this story and make it better? Like I said
Mm-hmm.
to Jess at one point, I was like, I wonder if you could make this into a horror film, because it's honestly like some of this stuff is really like frightening and intense. And I was like, like I think that for me, like I would lean into the darkness of this story and the gritty like realism, and almost make this for like teens and adults, really like lean into that aspect of this story.
Yeah, like if my books don't sell well, maybe I'm gonna write the YA adaptation of Watership Down, where the rabbits are ripping each other apart. And
It honestly doesn't even need that much of a revision to the story. It's just like an
nope,
acceptance of that's what the story is, right? Like I saw a comparison online to the original Brothers Grimm stories that Disneyfied, and to an extent, like there is some Disneyfication of this story, but I would love to see like that full dark, higher budget approach to Watership Down.
yeah, no, me too. Like I would love, yeah, and that to say, like despite the shortcomings of this movie, it does go hard. And I did want to ask you, like,
Yeah.
what moment or scene did you find maybe the hardest to watch in this movie?
Bigwig dying is probably one of the most alarming things that I've ever seen in a children's novel or
You mean
children's
getting
film.
caught in the snare?
Yes.
Yeah,
Because like I literally was like sitting on the edge of my seat, like I can't believe I just witnessed that. It is so hard to watch, and the fact that he
yeah.
survives barely at the end is I was just I was just sitting there like, "Oh my god."
So the whole deal is the rabbits go to this one warren. I think it's literally called like the Warren of the Shining Snares, and like there's all this food laid out for them, and all the rabbits are like creepy and weird and watching them, and they try to tell a story about their trickster hero, but Cowslip is like, no, we don't like those stories, you know, cunning is okay, but like what's really important is like dignity and nobility. And by the way, that's a great way of just showing like, oh, these rabbits are fucking weird.
Yeah.
Like they're not normal.
Right.
So then Fiverr wants to run away because he feels like something's wrong. He has this great line where it's like, it feels like we're in mists and things are being hidden from us.
Right.
So Fiverr decides to run off. Hazel chases after him. And then Bigwig, who at this point is kind of like a lunkhead, you know, he's the Sonny Corleone. Like he can be kind of a dick sometimes. He just kind of tells off Fiverr, runs around the corner, and then gets caught in a snare. And like, it's like a wire wrapped around his throat, right?
Yeah, and it shows like him bleeding, like like, you know, he's like frothing at the mouth, like, and this is an
like
animated film. Yeah.
Blood leaking out his lips and teeth, and like there's the moment where they're like, oh my god, like go get Blackberry, who is kind of implied to be the smart one, and they're just kind of like, it's tense because they don't really know what to do, right? Like,
right.
So finally one of them figures out, oh, we can pull this peg out of the ground, and then, you know, but then Bigwig's still not moving, and there's that very actually plaintive line where Hazel's like, Bigwig, please don't die. Like, and then after all that, he coughs up some blood and gets up.
Yeah, after they pull out the peg and it literally looks like he's died. And at this point again, we've seen one rabbit be taken away by the hawks, so it feels like that's where this is going. And there's just that like slight pull away that he actually does survive. And I think that as a plot point, that actually works for me. Like, if he had died there, I think it would have been actually too dark, especially in a children's film.
Well, especially with how important Bigwig becomes, like, throughout the rest of the movie, right? You know, and then I do remember that scene pretty vividly in the book. Like, the book is even more graphic. Like, I remember there's a line where they describe, like, Bigwig gets up and, like, Richard Adams describes, like, the blood and the vomit on his face. Like, it's...
Oh my god.
Graphic.
Is that the most graphic point of the movie for you as well?
No, actually, there's the moment that got me the hardest was, keep in mind I'd read up to that point in the book, so I wasn't that surprised when that happened to Bigwig.
Right.
I was still kind of taken aback by how hard it went, but then so there's the bad guy who I guess we need to talk about, General Woundwort.
Yes.
Which, by the way, as far as villain names goes, like, good job, Richard Adams. You did it. Like, Woundwort. So,
especially with a British accent. Fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So he doesn't even really show up until, like, the final third of the movie, but he kind of becomes, like, the main adversary of the rabbits. And by the way, for some reason, I do kind of like that. I feel like it would have been very easy to make, like, an evil fox or like a bear the villain in a rabbit-centric movie. But I love that the main villain is just another rabbit. It's just another asshole on the same level as them. So, anyways, they incur his wrath, and him and his army comes to storm Watership Down. They come up with this plan to like outwit him and blah, blah, blah. But Woundwort and his men storm the warren. And previously we'd met this one rabbit, I forget his name. The guy was like, oh, the council was merciful. The council was merciful. Basically a rabbit in Woundwort's warren who was repeatedly punished for going out when he wasn't supposed to. So like both his ears are broken and he's covered with scars and all that stuff. And anyway, so Woundwort bursts into the tunnel with his men. They come across this guy and Woundwort just rips him to shreds. Yeah. And like the blood is so red and it's everywhere. That's the moment where I was like, wow.
Well, and following that, like even later on, like for me, the second craziest part is when the dog shows up and like just eviscerates Woundwort's army. That is like, honestly, it's kind of shocking, A, and B, the score is like really upbeat and triumphant during that. And I was like, I don't know if this is the right tone that I expect for this moment. Like, the rabbits are not going to all die, the ones that we care about, but at the same time, like, this is also pretty traumatic too.
Yeah, and we see the dog, like, by the way, if you've ever seen a dog kill a rabbit, like I have, my family's old black lab. I watched her break a rabbit's neck once. It was pretty shocking. So,
Right.
anyways, I also find it funny too that the dog's not even hungry. He's just murderous. Like he's just
Yeah.
picking them up, killing them, getting another one. I'm like, wow, this dog fucking hates rabbits. So,
I mean, in fairness to the dog, he was taunted for like half the movie. So
yeah, that's true. He was just living his best life. And then also, lest we forget, there's that very, very iconic image from the movie where Woundwort rushes the dog. And we see like that kind of low angle shot where he's missing teeth and frothing at the mouth, and he's got his like claws out and everything. And
right.
ugh. Emily did not watch this movie with me, but earlier today we were eating dinner and I pulled up that image. I'm like, hey, do you want to see the bad guy from that movie I watched today? And I showed it to her and she was just like, oh.
Yeah, it's something.
That's a mean rabbit.
Yeah. Backing up into the story, when they first get to the Warren and the bird is introduced and the bird tells them like, oh, you don't have any females there. It's actually funny because at that moment you go, yeah, you're like, oh yeah, there are just like no women in this movie up to this point in time.
Yeah, basically. You're like, oh, I guess so. Yeah. It's all
And
dudes.
that's an honest criticism of both the book and the movie is that the female rabbits, and this is how critic Nicholas Tucker put it. He called them treated solely as passive baby factories, and I was like, that I could not have put that better myself.
Well, it's funny too because like Hazel's basically just like, oh yeah, like if Watership Down is going to survive, we need children. So it's like, it's not even like, oh, we should get some women so we can have some companionship and treat them like equals. It's like, no, we need to pump some babies in them, like,
right,
to continue our legacy.
On one hand, it's like, okay, well, they're animals and like that kind of makes sense. On the other hand, it's like, well, they're humanized anthropomorphic animals, right? Like that's definitely something that in that moment it becomes shockingly apparent like how blatant that is. And that's something that's interesting that the writer of the novel actually later in his career released a collection of short stories of Watership Down and the rabbits who lived in the Warren later on in life. And the women rabbit play a lot more central of a or are a lot more important to those stories. So he definitely took that criticism to heart because, this was a story that he told his two daughters while they were growing up, right? And that's where this comes to be. So like I imagine, it's something that he made the honest mistake because it's like it's not so like weirdly obvious as it is in something like Lawrence of Arabia, where it's just like, where's the women? It's just like,
hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, there's just like a general intensity to this movie, and then at one point you go, oh yeah, I guess there is no women rabbits with them.
I did kind of laugh at that though. I did find it funny. So it takes us 2/3 of the movie to get to Watership Down. Then they get there and everything's great and they're all lazing around. And then Hazel's basically like, we need bitches. And I did find it kind of funny that I'm like, that's the whole reason they come into conflict with General Woundwort is they're like, let's go and steal some of his women, right? Like,
yeah, it's basically the intro to Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, but it's there you go. It's Mad Max Fury Road. It's just an adaptation of Watership Down. It's all coming together.
Oh, baby. I think there is a lot of films and novels that I could directly attribute to Watership Down. So
yeah, well, it's funny. You and I both really like The Stand, and that's even mentioned.
Yeah,
in that book.
Oh, absolutely. Like the reference there is something that I thought of while watching this. There was even like The Walking Dead. Like there was a whole arc with Negan in probably the latter half of the series that feels like it's a direct adaptation of Watership Down. And that's kind of the thing is like with Richard Adams and his writing style of this story, like there's so many adult themes and so many like epic human stories that we've been telling for generations that come into play here that like it really does feel like this has so much depth to it, and it understands like how humans have been telling stories and how human, how different like human epics play out over different ages, right? And it feels like kind of a convergence of all of those stories.
Well, I mean, even if you want to go deeper, right? It's almost like the classic story of order versus chaos, right? Like,
Right.
we're out in the wild. We need stability. We need a sanctuary. We need our home, right? Like,
Hmm.
so, yeah, like, even if you want to go that much deeper, there's even that in there. So, yeah, it's essentially Richard Adams just took the classic hero's journey story and just
Yeah,
told it with rabbits, and it works.
it works really, really well. And that's something, again, that I keep hammering home is that I just absolutely love the story of Watership Down. It's just, it doesn't quite work in this movie. And the other part of this that doesn't quite work for me that we haven't actually talked about is the score of the film. I don't know if you
Yeah.
noticed the score of this, but it's kind of got like a reedsy old timey score to it that I think is even older than the 70s. Like I think this goes back to like the 50s scores. It's so prevalent throughout the entire film. Like there's really not a whole lot of quiet moments. And for a film as dark as this is, I really thought there should have been more moments of quiet reflection.
Yeah, and there's also that song, the Bright Eyes song
Yes.
by Art Garfunkel, which I might have to go listen to it again, but I found it very out of place in this movie.
I actually honestly slightly agree with you. And what's I found very interesting, because I did go back and listen to it afterwards, the song Bright Eyes kind of got interwoven in with the score of the film. So the actual song Bright Eyes doesn't quite even sound the same as what it sounds like in this movie. Like it uses a lot of that like almost like reedsy kind of 50s or older type of score to it that it's almost like an old Disney film would use. The actual song Bright Eyes is very it's something that gets stuck in your head actually that I've been kind of humming to myself for the last couple of days because it is actually a really good song, but it's very strangely shoehorned into this movie.
So the whole premise is Hazel gets shot while trying to steal some bitches from the farm, and they come back and like, oh, Hazel got shot, and Fiverr just says he's not dead, and he wanders off alone into the mist, and
Right, with the while he's like, having the vision of their god directing him on where to go, right?
yeah, and it's like I guess it's kind of touching in the sense that like it's about a brother's love, right?
Yep.
The love between two brothers, but I remember just being like, wait, Hazel got shot? Wait, we're having a music video right now? Like, okay.
Yeah, it's very strange, a lot of the style of the score and how it's used in this film.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of fans really enjoy the song and they really enjoy that part, but I didn't particularly feel it was well placed. Can I ask you, were there any moments that you got a little choked up in this movie or you
Yeah,
moved
honestly,
or anything
like
like?
I did enjoy that moment, and I thought it did slightly. The song itself didn't work 100%, but it was like one of those moments where I was slightly like again on the edge of my seat, like is Hazel dead here or not? After again, I had to realize that it was actually Hazel who had gotten shot. But I think honestly, like the end of the movie with Hazel moving on to the next life is, one of the most poignant endings of a film ever.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the ending too. Like, we flash forward however many years. Hazel's old now. By the
Yeah.
way, I talked a lot of shit about the character design in this movie, but they basically just make Hazel kind of a little bit hunched over and they gray his whiskers. And you know what? It works. I'm just like, that's old Hazel now. Like,
Yeah.
so, and then basically the rabbits talk a lot about like the black rabbit of death, essentially. And,
Hmm.
he basically just shows up and he basically says to Hazel, like, do you know who I am? Or something like Hazel's like, I don't think I know you. And then the black rabbit's like, are you sure you don't know who I am? And Hazel's like, oh, hello. Like he's instantly like, I'm getting the phrasing wrong, but he's pretty quickly like, oh, like, hello, my lord. And then
Right.
the black rabbit of death wants him to come join his Asula. Hazel looks over his
Yeah, they kind of
shoulder at.
reflect on his life and like all of his achievements, and he's like, like you've did it. Like you led these people to a better life.
Yeah, and there's that moment where Hazel kind of looks over his shoulder at like, his people, presumably even his children and grandchildren, and the Black Rabbit.
Yeah, there's a lot of
basically
kids, like child rabbits
Yeah.
playing at this point.
Yeah, and then Black Rabbit essentially just assures him, he's like, they're gonna be fine. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So
And he's like, it's time for you to rest. And it's honestly is a very beautiful ending.
it is. And then we see Hazel's soul essentially climb from his body, and him and the Black Rabbit just kind of prance around for a while. It is. I got a little choked up. I was like, yeah.
Yeah. It's the right way to end an epic, right? Like it's especially with the grand scale of this, like starting off with this big opening mythology of rabbits and then ending after the rabbits having triumphed and us getting to see that years later that the sacrifices that the rabbits that we saw and cared about did matter, and then
Yeah.
to finally see Hazel, our central figure, get to like relax. You succeeded, and it's time to move on. Like it's just really, yeah, I agree. It really did honestly move me.
Yeah. Fun fact, I was reading about this today. Apparently, Richard Adams was going to kill Bigwig during his big fight with General Woundwort. But his daughters were essentially just like, no, you're not doing that. And he just went, okay. And he let Bigwig live.
Yeah. Richard Adams, when he wrote this in 1972, it was at the insistence of his daughters because these were like little stories about rabbits that he told them. And he used like, I think a lot of it was just him using the rabbits to convey more adult ideas to them over time. And it was something that his kids actually were like, you should write this down. Like this is, you have some really great stories here. And I think that that's where this ends up ultimately being a piece of very important children's literature, is because children did have an influence on this story, like a tangible influence on it.
It's kind of almost similar to how like Christopher Tolkien influenced his dad a lot when he was writing Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of funny. I remember reading the introduction to this book actually a couple of years ago, and basically, according to Richard Adams, his daughters basically browbeat him into writing this book down. Like, there's a great quote where one of his daughters would be like, "It'd be great if you actually wrote a book instead of just talking about it."
Yeah. That's how all of the best writers start, is by begrudgingly accepting that they have good stories.
Some of us never even get there, but it is always begrudgingly.
So we're kind of talking about the novel right now, so I feel like this is a good point to talk sequels, prequels, and reboots. You did bring up the 1999 TV series. Where I watched it, I did want to highlight that the whole series is available on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
So I watched the first episode. That's where I watched the first episode. So, if this interests you, but for whatever reason you don't want to go read the book after instead watch more content related to Watership Down, you could go check that out. I think that if you want more story but want less of the dark realism or like dark storytelling aspects, the feeling of this being the real, I don't know how to say it, but it's it's much more lighthearted. It's the story. And I think that they even include some of the short stories of Richard Adams in it, but it's definitely a much lighter, kid-friendly approach to Watership Down.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's like I said, it's cutesier.
And then you brought up the 2018 anime series already, so I don't need to mention that anymore. The one thing that I do want to bring up in this part is that there's actually a D&D style of game that came out in the 90s related to Watership Down, and it's called B&B, Bunnies and Burrows.
Bees and burrows, eh?
No, Bunnies and Burrows. Why would it be
and
bees and
Okay.
burrows?
I don't know, but I thought that was really funny. But Bunnies and Burrows is also pretty funny. We should start a Patreon, and then one of the tiers we'll get it. And then
Yeah, I
play
mean,
it
if
on
people want to
stream or
pay us
something.
money to play Bunnies and Burrows, I am in.
Yeah, that's the real American dream.
Yeah. Effects and filming. This is actually consistent with the writing style of Watership Down, but all of the or most of the locations in the movie either exist or are based on real places in England, specifically in Hampshire in England. So you can actually go and visit like this area of England and take in all of that natural splendor.
Very nice. That'll be another Patreon tier. We'll come to England with you.
Oh, I am in. Yeah, like, and it's also like some of the art that they took from or put into the movie actually comes directly from Richard Adams' book, because he actually did have some diagrams and maps and other images. I've read that the images in the book are like really bizarre, like they're not very well drawn, some of them. So
Like did Richard Adams do his own art?
I don't
Or
know,
is it just...
but the original cover of the story is interesting to say the least. So
I'm Googling it right now. Okay. It's not that
it just
bad.
feels like it came out like 100 years before the book was actually released.
Yeah, definitely.
It reminds me of like a OG Alice in Wonderland style or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just very it's a little odd looking.
Not any of the Alice in Wonderlands that you grew up with. Like, I'm talking OG story of Alice in Wonderland style.
Yeah. Pre-Disney version.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I've kind of been on a little animation kick lately, so it was a good time for us to do this movie. Like,
yeah, because this one's one that off of the beaten path a little bit, right?
Yeah. Emily and I did watch the original Alice in Wonderland, the Disney version, I mean, last weekend.
What did you think? I would like to revisit that sometime.
I really liked it. I liked it a lot.
Is that on Disney Plus?
It is, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would like to watch that, because so much of our culture actually stems from Alice in Wonderland. It's like, it's kind of unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, there's reference to it in like The Matrix of all things, right?
Literally everything is a reference to Alice in Wonderland. It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
They based a lot of the movement of rabbits on real life rabbits. Like, they actually brought rabbits into the studio to study them. So maybe some of the movement that you didn't like is actually based on real rabbit movement, and you're just anti-rabbits.
Yeah, maybe. Is this it? Is this the gotcha moment of the podcast? Yeah.
I hate to say I gotcha, but I gotcha.
You know, Blake, you don't need to do gotcha moments of me. I'm so like unfettered. I will probably confess to all my failings given enough time.
Looking back at the times, like, this was actually a really popular movie more for adults. Like, they actually had late night screenings of this when it first came out, and it kind of, that's part of the reason why it has a little bit of cultural impact as well, is because I could actually honestly see going to see this at a theater at like 9:30 at night kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, if they ever do like a screening of this at our local cinema, like you and I are definitely going.
Yeah. Oh, I have the exact quote that the British Board of Film Censors wrote about why they gave it a G rating or a U rating in British terms. So their quote for their reasoning is, animation removes the realistic gory horror in the occasional scenes of violence and bloodshed, and we felt that while the film may move children emotionally during the film's duration, it could not seriously trouble them once the spell of the story is broken, and that a G rating certificate was therefore quite appropriate.
That's a very British justification for things.
What's so funny as well about like how the ratings agencies have rated films and TV over decades, right, is like violence has always kind of had like a strange pass, whereas nudity or language is much more strict about what you can and cannot show.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about Western culture, or even just culture in general. Violence,
right,
totally okay. Swearing, graphic sex, ooh, not okay.
We gotta gatekeep that stuff.
Yeah, hey, come on now.
No boobs or butts. No boobs or butts.
No boobs or butts. Yep. Anyways.
What a random tangent, but no, that it's honestly it's interesting, like reading about film history and like how each decade had its own type of moderation or lack of moderation, how filmmakers worked within or outside of those different societal ideas and like what was acceptable and what wasn't. It's really interesting. It really speaks to like our bigger culture.
Yeah, right. And I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, I am not squeamish about violence at all, right? But then every
Right.
now and then, I don't know if I'm even that abnormally desensitized to violence, but like every now and then I'll watch something or read something with someone else and they'll have a visceral reaction to things. And then I'll look at the screen or the page and be like, oh, that is pretty graphic. And then I'll have no reaction to it. And then I'll look at myself in the mirror later in the evening, like, am I actually a sociopath? Like,
Are you not entertained?
are you not entertained? Well, it's funny. So for the viewers at home, I recently signed with a literary agent for my second novel, and we're hoping to start sending it out to editors next month. And it's funny, when I wrote the first little chunk of it, I sent it out to some friends, Blake included, and everybody seemed to really like it. But one of my other friends, also named Mike, he had a visceral distaste for it because, according to, in his own words, it was gorography. Like, there was too much violence.
Wow.
And I kind of looked at him like, and I was like, I guess it is pretty violent, isn't it?
That's how I like my stories. The violence jacked up to 10, but we cannot swear, and there can be no boobs and butts.
Well, it's funny. My agent actually told me when I signed with her, she's like, you know, when I read violence, I want to cringe, and you do that very effectively. And I was just like, well, I am pretty cringy.
Nice. The legacy of the film, so they did end up rechanging it to, or re-rating it to PG after 44 years. It happened in 2022, later than
Wow.
I actually expected.
Wow, someone was finally like,
I think they were just sick of getting complaints, honestly.
yeah, that'll do it.
They were like, it's 44 years and I'm done with this conversation. Here you
Yeah,
go, PG. Shut up.
Now, piss off.
And even then, this is considered one of the most violent animated PG movies ever made.
Cool.
And it wasn't even a PG movie at first.
This is one of the most violent PG movies of all time. Ooh, well,
Wait,
wait
it's
till
not-
what I'm about to
Wait,
Yeah.
it's not PG yet? Should we change that? Should we tell somebody that they need to change that?
It's kind of funny. Did you ever watch Gravity Falls?
I have seen part of the first season. I really enjoyed it, but for whatever reason, I just didn't end up continuing.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing a couple of years ago, and I really, really liked it. And it's funny. There's a line in like one of the final episodes where the main villain, he basically, I might be remembering this wrong, so bear with me, but in the original script, the main villain was supposed to say something like, I'm going to go kill those kids. And the Disney executives were apparently like, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. So the creator, Alex Hirsch, changed the line to, I'm going to go turn those children into corpses, which is arguably worse. And the Disney executives were like, cool. Like,
More
that's
visceral,
fine.
for sure.
Yeah,
Very
basically.
much more visceral.
But Disney was just like, sure, that's fine.
I have a question for you. Did Kahar swear? Did Kahar shoot first?
I don't know, because I could barely understand him. Does he swear at one point?
I caught this while I was watching it, and apparently it's something that's been debated for a very long time, is to whether or not the bird tells the rabbits to piss off at some point.
Oh, no, he definitely does do that. He does tell them to piss off.
I think he did as well. Apparently
Yeah.
that does not happen in the script. It doesn't happen in the book, and it wasn't, it's something that didn't get picked up in the original rating for having any sort of language. But I was like, did that bird just tell all of the rabbits to piss off?
No, I definitely heard that. Like, it's that scene where they're trying to coax him into, like, doing reconnaissance for him, and they push him out of the hovel. He's like, piss off. I'm like, yep.
Yeah. And history repeating itself here on the legacy. The adults of who were children during the 70s and 80s who were scarred by this movie decided to bring it back in, I think it was honestly within the last 5 years. There's a British channel that now shows Watership Down every Easter, which they got a lot of backlash for. Yeah, for all of the rabbit murder that happens.
I mean, hey, if you gotta play, if it's Easter, what are you gonna do?
It's like Groundhog Day, right? Like, if you can find a good holiday to tack a movie onto, like, it just becomes something that you just happen to want to watch every year.
Also, what other iconic rabbit movies are there?
There's got to be some Easter movies that are not good, or maybe there's one Easter movie that's good. I can't think of many children's Easter movies. Let me rephrase.
What other rabbit movies are there out there that don't feature Bugs Bunny?
True.
By the way, there's that scene. There's actually that really moving scene towards the end during the big climax where Hazel prays to God and says, "Please take me instead." Mm-hmm. Essentially, like, I'll offer up my life for the lives of my friends. And God literally answers. And by the way, it's kind of a funny scene. It's moving, but it's kind of funny in like an ironic sense where God basically just says, like, hey man, like, do you have any idea how many moms offer up their lives for their children? Or how many guards offer up their lives for their captains? Like, you know, what has been written shall be, right?
Right. Yeah, like you can't change fate, you know? Like,
it's a very moving, dramatic moment, but reflecting on it, I thought it was kind of funny that imagine praying to God for something and God picking up the phone, telling you to piss off, and then just like, that's it.
Just hold your horses, man. Like, either you're all gonna die or it's gonna be okay.
Yeah,
and that's really the message of this movie, right? Is like, either we're all gonna die or everything might be okay.
Right. I just found it like it's a very moving, dramatic moment, but like reflecting afterwards, imagine praying to God, God answering, but not answering you at the same time. Just being like, eh. Anyways, I thought it'd been really funny. I really wanted God to be voiced by like Mel Blanc doing his Bugs Bunny voice. That would have been really funny.
True. I was watching something or I was playing something and just one character had just like such an outlandish voice that I was like, what is going on right now comparatively?
Yeah, what is this? Yeah.
I think it's actually, and literally nobody's going to get this reference, but there's like it was in Skyrim actually. There was a dog that has like a Boston accent. It's like a talking dog that has this Boston accent, and he follows you around. Oh,
isn't his name like Miko or something?
Yeah. Like heavy Norse themed video game and story. How this Boston accent talking dog just shows up, and you're just like, what is going on right now?
Yeah, that's I don't know. I do find it funny though how you're like, nobody's gonna get this reference, and then you referenced one of the most famous video games of all time. And I was instantly like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Jesus.
True. Personal reviews and the partner factor. So I also didn't really watch this with Jess. She had seen it before. She's actually read the book as well before, and she was like, yeah, they're both fine.
Oh, okay. She was kind of into it.
She was kind of into it, but she was also like, I don't really want to watch this right now. I'm not really feeling it because it's a very sad story. And she's like, it's just not for me tonight. So she passed on it. Like, I've been kind of hammering home throughout this discussion, like, I really genuinely loved the story. I thought that it was moving at parts. It's epic in its scale, and despite the flaws in the filmmaking, I was genuinely having a good time with this movie.
You
and
were
by good
charmed.
time I mean sad. Yes, I was charmed. You know, like the themes about life and struggles and successes and failures, like. And, you know, like it's definitely not executed perfectly in this movie, but it's still profound enough that I genuinely enjoyed this. And I might honestly go back and watch this again at some point, like 5-10 years from now.
I kind of want to check out the book and also the other adaptations of this. Like, I might check out the YTV version, and I might even check out the terrible Netflix version just for gigs.
Well, if you do, like, we could always have an extra conversation, a follow-up conversation about that, because I want to read the book as well. Do you have the book? Like, do you actually buy it?
I did, but then I got rid of it during
You
one of my
son of
many
a bitch.
moves. Yeah, I know. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I think so. 3 years ago, I had a big move, and like I got rid of a lot of my books because I just had a lot of them, and I didn't want to be responsible for dragging them to a different city with me.
Right.
And I think I remember looking at Watership Down and being like, like, what are the odds that Blake's going to start a podcast and then this is going to come up? So I wasn't playing the long game.
You son of a bitch. What are your thoughts?
I had a hard time in the first 20 minutes. Like, I think you did too.
Yeah.
I really got into it. Like, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Yeah, I think I will watch it again, and I do want to read the book now. So, like, it's funny. I heard that Richard Adams didn't really like this movie all that much, but it got me, rekindled my interest in the source material. So, like, hey, what else can you ask for from a film adaptation of your work, right?
Yeah, and that's actually the one good discourse. You and I were talking about Roadhouse and, what's come of the remake and it maybe not being all that great. But to its credit, like I have seen discussion online of people having watched the new Roadhouse going, oh, the old Roadhouse is on Prime as well. Oh, this is actually a really good movie. I'm glad I checked this out now, kind of thing. So
yeah. So hey,
so to its credit,
do, right?
like maybe art isn't always perfect, and that's actually something that I brought up even when we were doing our best of episode of last year. Like Contact ended up making my top 5 movies of the year, and it wasn't because Contact was necessarily a better made movie than some of the other movies I saw last year, but it was just so important to rekindling my interest in sci-fi and space and some of those like weighty sci-fi ideas and concepts that I could not recognize
right?
it.
Yeah, it's like that meme, task failed successfully.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like honestly, like if anybody wants to adapt this, make it bigger, more epic, take a more mature approach to the film and the story, and find some better artists to create the backdrop of the film. Like I think that Studio Ghibli could really have a really great adaptation of this.
Oh, fuck yeah. They would crush it.
Yeah, like I don't think that Disney, especially like Pixar or DreamWorks, like I wouldn't hand this to any of them, but Studio Ghibli I think could make a very interesting adaptation. Make it like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, honestly, like cuz I want more of Watership Down. Like I want this to be bigger in scale because it does feel like it deserves a larger scale. And I think that even like you could even make this a fable for, and so this is part of the other thing that I think why this story has such staying power is because in using the rabbits to tell this story and not getting too deep into political ideologies of the rabbits and everything, like I think a lot of different people are going to see a lot of different things. Like the movie itself, and probably even to a larger degree, the novel, allow itself to be open to interpretation and allow for people to see their own struggles within this film.
Well, it's the archetypal human struggle, right?
Yeah.
It's order versus chaos. It's the search for community. It's
Yeah.
it's the Aeneid, it's the Odyssey, it's everything and everyone,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like I could even seeing this being like a parable for the plight of like, I don't know, the indigenous people or something of North America or something like that.
Oh,
right?
yeah, easily. And I mean, like, you could look at General Woundwort and like lots of people have pointed out the like fascist or totalitarian
easily
undercurrents going on there. So like, yeah, maybe that's when you like strip things down to like metaphors, or like when you use non-human characters, you kind of allow anyone and everyone to project themselves onto those rabbits.
Right.
Except women, because there's no women. But I digress.
Yeah, that I think in 2024 a slightly different approach to that like definitely is warranted. And there's a gateway to that even, right? Like there's a character that happens upon General Woundwort's Warren and manages to escape with his life just barely, And these rabbits who have struggled and found this paradise, who want to share this world with other people and who want to like free another group from the tyranny that they themselves maybe felt in their old Warren, right? To a lesser degree.
Yeah.
There's definitely a gateway there where it doesn't have to be like, oh, wait, how are we going to make babies now?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Actually, I think I did read that BlackBerry, the quote unquote smart one, I think in the 1999 adaptation, they just made him a her.
Yes, they did.
And I was kind of just like, cool, good. Like, that works.
Yeah, and yeah, you don't necessarily like, not every character needs to be changed necessarily. And having something a little bit more fleshed out would definitely allow for more characters that you kind of can follow. I think where I ultimately land is like, I don't know if I will. I might check out the YTV show now that I know where it is and that it exists. But I think that the story, to me, if you're going to adapt it, makes more sense to do it again as a film, but make it more adult.
Make it more adult and longer. I'm actually asking for a longer movie, which I never do.
Yeah, 90 minutes wasn't enough for this one.
No. And I mean, you know what? To be left wanting more is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's it then. Yeah. No, it was great. Like, I'm glad, you and I think this is maybe the most we've ever agreed on a movie ever.
Yeah, actually. And it's weird because I feel like we've been butting heads lately. So
yeah.
Maybe this is going to be a boring episode because it's literally just been like, you've been like, what about this? And I'll be like, I agree. And then you're like, what about this? And I'm like, I agree. Like, this has been 2 hours of Blake and I aggressively agreeing with each other. So anyways.
So no, it was a good episode. Like, I'm glad we did this movie. It's been something that's always kind of been in my peripherals. Like, this and Of Mice and Men are just like two pieces of like classic literature that I have never, like, I just know them and I've never read them. Like, the other one that I would kind of put on that level is like War of the Worlds, which I did seek out as a teenager and read.
Yeah, and I actually, you lent me your copy, and I held on to it for like 9 years, and I read it during the first month of the pandemic, so...
Did you actually?
Yeah, I did.
That's hilarious.
It was pretty fun.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's it then for this episode. It was a good episode.
Yeah, I agree. See, I'm doing it again. I'm agreeing. No, Blake, I think this episode fucking sucks.
All right, we need to pick a more divisive movie between you and I next time, so...
Yeah, I guess so.
Tell your dad, and, we'll see you next time. Oh my god! I just realized that we just did Watership Down over Easter as well. We're just as bad as the British.
Wait, I assumed that was intentional on your part.
No, it wasn't intentional at all.
I was like in the bathroom this morning. I was like, oh, that was clever of Blake to do that. But wow, okay.
I just realized that I chirped the British for doing this every year. I just did it myself, not even thinking about it.
Oh,
we're literally recording this on Easter Monday.
Yeah, also April Fool's Day, so...
That is hilarious.
Okay, Blake,
I literally just put that together at the end of this episode.
Jesus Christ. Actually, no, yeah, that's right, because this is the time of year we usually do an animated movie, and you were just like a couple weeks ago, you're like, is Watership Down okay? And I was like, sure, whatever, so... Yeah,
that's hilarious.
Okay.
That's so funny.
That is pretty silly. Okay, well, on that note...
Until next time when we ruin your holidays with something strangely applicable.
Yeah. Let's see what happens.
For May 24, I guess we watched The Death of a Monarch, some sort of movie about that.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe for July 4th we just watch Independence Day, but I mean, that's not too obvious.
Yeah, that one's a little obvious for sure, but all right.
Bit on the nose. Bye.